They stopped trusting him before he finished the sentence. That was the part Darnell Hayes would remember longest. Not the shouting in the street, not the police lights washing red and blue over the side of the city bus, not even the woman in the white SUV standing with one hand on her chest and the other pointing toward him like she had just discovered danger in human form. It was the speed with which a crowd, two officers, and half a dozen passengers decided that if there had been a traffic incident, the black bus driver in a city uniform must have done something reckless first. She cut across the lane from the right, Darnell said, calm but firm, standing beside the open bus door, with his route badge clipped to his chest and 23 shaken passengers behind him. I hit the brakes to keep from crushing her. One officer barely looked at him before turning back to the woman in pearls and a winter white blazer. "Ma'am, start from the beginning," he said. Darnell felt the old cold discipline settle into his spine. He had been driving buses in Baltimore for 13 years. He knew exactly what kind of moment this was. The kind where authority decides credibility first and evidence later. Less than 20 minutes afterward, the traffic camera footage from the intersection would play on a cruiser laptop and show exactly who swerved, who panicked, and who prevented a multi-car collision with 3 seconds of perfect judgment. But at 5:42 that rainy evening, standing at the corner of Madison and Utah, with his pulse still elevated from the near miss, all Darnell knew was that the truth had once again arrived black, working class, and inconvenient. Darnell Hayes was 46, broad-shouldered, careful with language, and built like a man who had spent most of his adult life carrying responsibility through weather. He had driven for the Baltimore Transit Authority since his early 30s, after a decade in warehouse logistics and one brief, miserable year trying to run his own delivery route business before a partner disappeared with the tax money. Driving city buses was harder than outsiders imagined and less respected than it deserved. You had to manage traffic, schedules, tempers, weather, wheelchairs, school kids, drunks, construction detours, and the daily miracle of keeping 40 feet of steel from becoming a problem in streets built by people who never expected modern congestion. Darnell was good at it because he did not take the machine personally. He drove the way some men pray, attentive, exact, and with deep respect for what can go wrong in an instant. He lived in West Baltimore with his wife Sonia and their 16-year-old daughter Mariah, who was currently in a phase of correcting adults on historical facts and announcing that all institutions were broken with enough confidence to make Thanksgiving dangerous. Darnell adored her. He adored Sonia too, a middle school attendant secretary who could end nonsense with one look and had been telling him for years that patience was a spiritual gift the city did not deserve from him nearly as often as it got. Most mornings he left for the depot before sunrise, carrying coffee in a thermos and a lunch he usually forgot to eat on time. He liked the early pull-out routes best, before the traffic thickened and before people brought their whole disappointed day onto the bus. This particular shift had started at 11:30 a.m. and was running long. Rain always made the late commuter hours worse. Drivers got aggressive, visibility flattened, and every red light seemed to breed somebody convinced one lane marker was more of a suggestion than a law. Route 18 was packed by the time Darnell turned eastbound toward Madison just after 5:30. Office workers with damp collars, 2 exhausted nurses, a woman balancing grocery bags between her knees, 3 high school boys trying to act too cool to sit down, an older man with a cane, a mother with a stroller folded beside the priority seats, and enough wet umbrellas to make the floor slick no matter how often people stamped their shoes. Darnell knew most of the regulars by face, if not by name. One of them, Miss Bernice, rode his bus home from the pharmacy 3 times a week and always reminded younger people to move down in the aisle before he had to say it. She was on board that evening, sitting halfway back with a plastic bag of prescriptions in her lap and the watchful posture of a woman who had seen too much to miss much. The rain had not become dangerous yet, but it had reached that annoying in-between stage where the roads look merely glossy, right until a car in front of you decides to brake, like the law of friction personally offended them. Darnell kept his speed measured and his following distance wider than impatient drivers appreciated. He had just cleared the previous stop and was coming through the green at Madison when he saw the white Lexus SUV to his right. That was the first sign. It was in the turn lane, angled slightly wrong, 1 car length ahead and creeping with indecisive speed. Darnell noticed because bus drivers notice everything near the front quarter panel. That is where trouble likes to appear wearing confidence. The Lexus had no signal on. Then in one stupid abrupt movement, it cut left across the striped buffer and lunged directly into the bus lane, trying to beat a van through the intersection from the wrong side. Darnell did what professionals do before fear reaches language. He hit the horn, braked hard but straight, and yanked just enough to avoid clipping the Lexus broadside while keeping the rear of the bus from fishtailing into the next lane. The whole cabin lurched. Passengers shouted. Grocery bags fell. One of the high school boys slammed into a pole and started cursing. Ms. Bernice's medicine bag hit the floor. The stroller skidded but stayed folded. Somewhere near the back, a man yelled, "Yo!" And someone else shouted, "Jesus!" The bus stopped 6 feet short of the curb after the intersection. No collision with the SUV. Minor contact only with the Lexus's rear bumper as it jerked back into place. Darnell would later learn there was a paint scrape, nothing more. But because the bus was large, the braking violent, and the street full, the scene looked dramatic enough for people to choose narratives fast. Darnell set the brake, notified dispatch of sudden stop and possible incident, and stood to assess the cabin. "Everybody all right? Stay seated if you can. I need to check the front and call this in." His voice stayed level because passengers borrow their emotional temperature from the driver, whether they know it or not. A nurse near the middle said she was okay. One schoolboy rubbed his shoulder theatrically and announced he was suing everybody. The mother with the folded stroller looked shaken but unharmed. "Mrs. Anna," Bernice said, "I'm fine, baby, just mad." Outside, the driver of the Lexus was already out of her vehicle and performing distress for the entire block. She was white, probably early 50s, expensively dressed, blonde bob still holding shape despite the rain, and carrying the furious moral certainty of someone who had never in her life been forced to wait long for strangers to believe her version. "He nearly killed me," she yelled before Darnell had even stepped down from the bus. "He came flying through the intersection." That last part was so divorced from physical possibility that Darnell almost laughed, but adrenaline had not yet settled, and the laugh died in his throat. "Ma'am, you cut across from the turn lane," he said. "I had the right of way and a full load." She looked at him as if the fact that he answered at all were further proof of aggression. "Do not talk over me," she snapped. "You bus people think you own the road." You bus people. Darnell had time only to note it before the first bystanders drifted nearer under awnings and umbrellas, hungry for event the way city sidewalks often are. A young guy with headphones pulled halfway off started filming. Someone asked if anybody was hit. The white woman, her name would later turn out to be Allison Pike, kept talking loudly enough for witnesses to organize themselves around her emotion instead of the actual geometry of the incident. Within 6 minutes, police arrived. 2 officers, both white, one young and broad-faced with damp uniform shoulders, Officer Keenan Doyle. The other older, compact, tired around the mouth, Officer Lisa Morrow. Darnell saw at once which one was listening and which one had already begun assigning roles. Doyle went straight to Allison Pike because panic in expensive clothes reads as urgent to men like him. "Ma'am, start from the beginning." Darnell, still standing by the bus door, said, "Officer, I need you to note that she crossed from the right-hand turn lane into the bus lane." Doyle held up one finger toward him without turning. "I'll get to you in a minute." That one finger did more to raise Darnell's blood pressure than the near collision had. Not because it was dramatic, because it was practiced. The bodily language of dismissing a black working man while you prioritize the white woman already shaping herself into victimhood. Allison began her story instantly. The bus was speeding. She had been established in lane. He came up aggressively. She feared for her life. She might have neck pain. She had somewhere important to be, and now her whole evening was ruined. Doyle nodded through all of it as though information and performance were interchangeable. Officer Morrow, to her credit, looked once at the lane markings and once at the bus stop position with a more skeptical eye. Then she turned to Darnell. "You the operator?" "Yes, ma'am." "What happened?" "White Lexus in the turn lane cut across into the bus lane without signal. I hit the brakes to avoid rolling over her rear quarter. Full bus behind me. You can ask my passengers." Morrow nodded once and jotted something down. Doyle, still with Allison, asked, "Did the bus strike you first or after you tried to avoid him?" Darnell closed his eyes for half a second. That wording told him everything. Allison pressed one hand to her neck. I just know he was on me before I even had a chance, Darnell said, louder now because he was done volunteering patience to a bad process. There's a traffic camera on this intersection. Morrow looked up. Doyle did not. I'm aware of that, Doyle said, still writing from Allison's account. Right now I'm taking statements. Then write mine down too, Darnell replied. That got Doyle's eyes on him at last, and the young officer's face settled into the expression some authority figures use when a black man's insistence feels more like insolence to them than participation. Sir, if you can't let me do my job. Ms. Bernice came down the bus steps before Darnell could answer. She was 68, black, short, raincoat buttoned wrong from the jolt, and carrying herself with the righteous indignation of a grandmother who had lived long enough to stop letting nonsense pass quietly. No, she said, pointing her pharmacy bag at Doyle. You do your job and listen to him too. I was sitting right there. That woman came across like she lost her mind. Doyle blinked. 2 more passengers followed. One of the nurses, Latina, still in scrubs under her coat, and a young white man with a laptop bag who looked like he hated being involved but hated dishonesty more. Both said the same thing. The SUV crossed wrong. The driver had no business being there. The bus did not come flying. The bus stopped them from a worse accident. Allison turned in disbelief. You were all on the bus. Of course you're taking a side. The white guy with the laptop bag said, Ma'am, I'm taking the side of what happened. That helped, though Darnell hated that it helped more because of who said it. Doyle still looked unconvinced, or perhaps inconvenienced by evidence arriving from the wrong direction. We'll sort it out, he said. Darnell looked at the rain-slick intersection and then back at the officer. By checking the camera, right? Officer Morrow answered this time. Yes. Good. Because Darnell knew what he saw, and he also knew how quickly certainty can become paperwork if no one bothers to anchor it to facts. He thought of Sonia getting a call that he'd been cited, thought of the Transit Authority disciplinary review, thought of how many jobs require black people to survive accusation before breakfast and still smile by dinner. A transit supervisor arrived 10 minutes later, a Puerto Rican man named Ruben Salazar who took one look at Darnell's face and asked quietly, You okay? Darnell said yes, which was not really the question being asked, and Ruben nodded like he understood anyway. He spoke to dispatch, arranged for a replacement coach if needed, and told the officers flatly that Route 18 buses carried internal braking telemetry and forward-facing exterior video that would support timeline review. Allison Pike suddenly became very interested in whether all this was really necessary for a minor scrape. That, too, told the truth faster than words. But the cleanest truth sat above them on a city traffic pole. Officer Morrow called it in. After some delay, because bureaucracy loves timing almost as much as prejudice does, a tech in the traffic command center confirmed there was usable footage from the intersection camera and began pulling the previous 10 minutes. Morrow asked Darnell and Allison to wait by the cruiser while it uploaded. Doyle kept trying to manage the scene like his first instinct had not already exposed itself. Allison alternated between offended dignity and selective frailty. Darnell stood in the rain under the shelter of the bus door with his hands folded over the top of his caneless but steady posture, and said nothing else because facts were finally on their way. When the footage came up on the laptop, everybody leaned. The angle was high and clear enough to turn the storytelling into geometry. Madison Green, bus established in lane, moving legally, speed unremarkable. White Lexus in the right turn lane. Pause, no signal. Sudden illegal cut left across the striped buffer into the bus lane. The bus horn, the brake, the violent but controlled stop, the SUV's fishtail, the near avoidance of what would have been a much harder impact if Darnell had been even half a second slower. Officer Morrow watched the clip once, then again. Doyle's ears went red. Allison made a little noise in the back of her throat and said, That angle doesn't show what I experienced. Morrow closed the laptop halfway and looked at her. It shows what happened. No one spoke for a second. Then Morrow turned to Darnell. Mr. Hayes, you were correct. The apology did not come fully, but the acknowledgement mattered. Doyle stared at the curb and said nothing. Ruben Salazar, standing just behind Darnell, let out a slow breath through his nose like a man who had seen exactly this movie too many times. One of the passengers from the bus, the white guy with the laptop bag, muttered, "Imagine that." Not quietly enough. Allison Pike tried one final retreat into tone. "Well, I may have misjudged the lane, but he was still very aggressive with his horn." Mrs. Bernice is still close enough to hear, said, "Lady, that horn is why your children still got a mother tonight." Even Officer Morrow looked like she almost smiled. What followed was administrative and therefore less satisfying than people imagine justice feels. Allison was cited for improper lane change and failure to yield. A report was filed. Transit downloaded the bus telemetry and video for records, both of which confirmed Darnell's account. Passengers were transferred after statements were taken. The city tow truck was canceled because the Lexus damage was cosmetic. The whole street, once so eager for spectacle, began to dissolve back into ordinary evening traffic. But before Darnell reboarded to move the bus to the curb lane for inspection, Officer Morrow stopped him. "I should have come to you first," she said quietly, just outside the hearing of the crowd. Darnell looked at her for a long second. "Yes," he said. She nodded, accepting it because there was no thinner version of the truth worth offering. Inside the bus, passengers settled with the strange, sheepish solidarity that follows shared public wrongness. Was some incredible breaking. One of them was some incredible breaking. One of the high school boys announced to nobody in particular that the SUV lady was fully bugging. Even Tiana, no, different story. Stay consistent. There is no child from prior story. The mother with the stroller said, "Thank you for keeping us upright." And that one landed deepest because it named the actual work. Ruben stood at the front while the last forms were signed and said, low enough for only Darnell to hear, "I'm recommending commendation on the stop." Darnell almost laughed. "I'd settle for people listening before the camera has to raise its hand." Ruben shook his head. "I know." The story traveled faster than he expected. Transit systems are ecosystems of rumor, grievance, and legend. By the next morning, operators at 2 depots had already heard that a driver on Route 18 got blamed for a crash a white woman caused until traffic cam saved him. By Monday, the union rep knew. By Tuesday, local transit social media had a sanitized version circulating under headlines about professional driving under pressure. None of those versions really captured the thing itself. The feeling of standing in public truth while authority builds a false version around you because your face fits an old shortcut in their mind. The official commendation came the following week. Baltimore Transit Authority issued Darnell Hayes a letter praising his exceptional hazard response and safe collision mitigation under sudden roadway incursion conditions. The phrasing was absurdly bureaucratic, but it came with a $250 safety recognition bonus and a photograph in the employee bulletin, wearing his route jacket and not smiling quite enough for public relations. Mariah laughed when she saw it on the kitchen table. "You look like they interrupted you in the middle of being right," she said. Sonia read the letter, set it down, and asked the real question. "Did the police apologize?" Darnell took a sip of coffee. "One did." "The one who listened second?" He nodded. Sonia made a face that managed to convey an entire black marriage worth of shared understanding in half a second. "Figures." At dinner, Mariah wanted the whole story from the beginning, not the edited, modest version. When he got to the part where the officer told the white woman to start from the beginning before taking his statement, Mariah slammed her fork down. "See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. People think evidence is a personality contest." Darnell looked at her. "That's a strong sentence." "It's an accurate one." He smiled into his plate. A month later, the city held a transit safety luncheon in one of those municipal conference rooms where coffee tastes like paperwork. Darnell was asked to say a few words about defensive driving under urban pressure. He stood at the podium in a clean shirt, in his best patience, and looked out at mechanics, operators, supervisors, city staff, and 2 police representatives from the traffic division. He had thought about keeping it simple. Then he thought about the cruiser laptop, the finger held up at him while the wrong person got believed first, and the years behind that moment. So he said the useful thing. "Good driving is partly about reaction time," he told them, "but it's also about being seen clearly after the fact. A lot of us in these jobs know the machine can record what happened better than people sometimes can, because people bring assumptions to a scene before they bring questions. My advice is this: check your camera before you check your bias. It's faster. The room went very quiet. Then slowly, it applauded. Officer Morrow approached him afterward and said, "That line's going to stick with me." "Good," Darnell said, because that was the heart of it in the end. Not the commendation, not the bonus, not even the traffic citation landing where it should have landed. It was that a black bus driver spoke the truth in real time and was treated as less credible than the white woman who caused the problem until a camera, mounted high above the street and blessedly indifferent to race or class, forced everyone to watch what he had already said happen. They refused to believe him because believing him would have required doing something harder than checking a screen. It would have required seeing him clearly the first time.